Number 10. The neighbor. When the new family moved in next door, I immediately knew their son was troublesome. He was 19, a full-grown creep, obsessed with slasher films and the kind of gruesome details from my time in Vietnam that no sane person would ever want to hear. Worse than his fixation on violence was his casual cruelty. He took pleasure in tormenting stray animals. The guy was a bona fide whack job. What really put me on edge was his obsessive focus on my daughter, who was only 7. He'd strike up conversations with her as she walked home from school, and he'd call out to her over the fence when she played in our backyard. I was already furious, but the line was crossed when he called our house, specifically asking to speak to her. That was it. I marched next door and unleashed a blistering threat to him and his parents. He was to stay the hell away from her, and if I ever saw him near her again, there would be consequences. A strange new wrinkle developed after that confrontation. My daughter was already an imaginative kid, prone to being a little paranoid, monsters under the bed, the usual childhood fears. But then she started telling me about something living in her closet. She said it was only there at night, too scary to get up and tell us, and always gone by morning. We dismissed it as a simple nightmare, a lingering effect of her normal anxieties. A few weeks later, my wife and daughter went to my mother's for a girls' night. Alone, I settled in for a late movie session, eventually passing out on the downstairs couch around 2 a.m. The ringing phone jolted me awake. It was my neighbor, the mother of the creep. "We saw you were up," she whispered frantically, "and he's missing. His door was open, which never happens, and he's nowhere in the house. We need help looking." I was confused. "Up? I've been passed out on the couch. Why did you think I was up?" Her reply was delivered with unnerving certainty. "We saw you walking around upstairs, and the light is on." My blood ran cold. I knew I hadn't been upstairs, and I hadn't turned on a single light. I slammed the phone down. I ran outside to my truck to grab my shotgun, but froze when I saw the flashing lights of a sheriff's car pulling up to my neighbor's house. I bolted toward them, screaming that there was an intruder in my house. As I looked up at my daughter's room, I saw it. The light was definitely on, and a silhouette was pacing back and forth across the window. The deputies stormed the house. They found the neighbor's son, the 19-year-old monster, calmly waiting in my daughter's room. He had created a twisted little setup for himself inside her closet. His chilling explanation solidified the horror of what had been happening for weeks. I liked to watch her sleep in the moonlight. Number 9. The silent pickup. The frantic tick of the clock was my soundtrack. It was Friday night, and my friend's car horn blared, a final impatient signal. We were already late for the hockey game across town. I practically dove into the passenger seat, strapping in as we sped off, our conversation already bubbling with excitement about the night ahead. The entire drive was a blur of laughs and predictions, so engrossing that I didn't even notice the silence coming from my pocket. It hit me only when we pulled into the city garage. My pocket was empty. My heart sank. My phone. I patted my jeans, frantically checking the car floor, the seat, under the mats, nothing. I was sure I must have left it at home in my rush. But as we walked to the arena, a knot of worry tightened in my stomach. What if I'd dropped it outside? During the first intermission, I couldn't stand the suspense any longer. I borrowed my friend's phone and hurried to the relative privacy of the bathroom. I dialed my home number, fingers crossed that someone, anyone, had picked it up. It rang once, twice. On the third ring, someone picked up. "Hello?" I asked, my voice edged with hope. Silence. Just a faint hollow sound on the other end. "Hey, it's me. I'm just checking to see if I left my phone at home," I practically shouted, trying to overcome the fear that was now a dull throb. Still no answer. I sighed, an annoyed thought forming. It had to be my little brother messing with me. I hung up, frustrated but figuring my phone was safe. The game ended late. I got home to a dark and quiet house. My parents' car wasn't in the driveway. I let myself in and immediately called my dad on my friend's phone. "Where are you guys?" I asked. "We went out to eat and decided to catch the concert at the park with your brother," my mom explained. "We left right after you did. We'll be home in about half an hour." I hung up, relief washing over me. Safe at home. Now to find my phone. I walked into the living room, but then I froze. Wait. My parents and little brother had been out since I left. They weren't home when I called. A wave of icy fear crashed over me. If my family wasn't home, then who had picked up my phone? The blood drained from my face. My stomach clenched into a hard knot of pure terror. It was in that agonizing second that I heard it, a distinct quiet creak of the back door opening and closing. I didn't hesitate. I spun around, bolted for the front door, and sprinted blindly across the lawn to my neighbor's house, pounding on their door until they let me in. The police were called immediately. The officer's report was chillingly simple: the back door had been left unlocked, and someone had quietly entered the house while it was empty. Nothing was stolen. But that wasn't the scary part. The most terrifying thought, the one that kept me up all night, was the realization that I had almost walked into my own house, and could have fallen asleep, with a stranger lurking inside. Number 8. The Screams of the James River. My friends and I were settled in for a night of fishing on the James River. We had a decent fire crackling by the shoreline, the usual mix of idle talk, and a few beers passing between us. It was comfortable, until it wasn't. Suddenly, the conversation died. It was as if a switch had been flicked, plunging the group into an instant unnerving silence. Every one of us was staring across the dark water, feeling an intense prickling sensation, like something or someone was staring back. A few guys tried to break the tension with the typical macho jokes, but the uneasy feeling held us captive. Then, from the opposite shore, a sound erupted that instantly froze the blood in our veins. It was blood-curdling, unlike anything I had ever heard. Every hair on my body seemed to vibrate and tingle. The best way I can describe it is the sound of a wild, non-verbal person being gutted alive, not a word, just a pure high-pitched agonizing scream. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. We simply sat, locked in our stare across the river. Just as the echoes faded, a second scream was unleashed, louder and more forceful than the first. That was the breaking point. Several of us bolted to the trucks parked nearby, scrambling to retrieve various firearms. When we regrouped, we sat in a tight silent circle. Our eyes were fixed on the opposite bank, watching the firelight dance and reflect off the wet rocks. We waited, tense, for another sound, for anything to move. Finally, the third scream came. It was just as sudden, but this time it wasn't across the river. It was on our side, erupting from the brush just a yard or two away. We hightailed it out of there, leaving our rods, chairs, and most of our gear behind. As we reached the safety of our trucks, we heard the scream one final time, just beyond the tree line. We all floored the gas, peeling out and roaring away from the river as fast as our trucks could carry us. We never found out what was making those sounds. Number 7. The Amboy Ambush. I was taking the back roads, a shortcut from 29 Palms, California, heading toward Albuquerque, New Mexico. 29 Palms sits in the lonely, desolate high desert east of Los Angeles, and this route was nothing but a two-lane ribbon cutting through absolute emptiness. The only real landmark was Amboy, a nearly abandoned town situated at an unnervingly low elevation, almost as far below sea level as Death Valley. I'd passed through the baked, dusty settlement and was now driving solo in the late afternoon, beginning my ascent into the mountain range that separates Amboy from Interstate 40. Reaching the summit, I descended into a canyon. The road was narrow, flanked by high rustling grass on both sides. Up ahead, something lay scattered in the middle of the road. As I approached, I slowed, my pulse ticking up a notch. Blocking both lanes was a red Pontiac Fiero, stopped sideways. An open suitcase lay nearby, clothes spilled across the cracked asphalt. Worse, two figures, a man and a woman, were lying face down in the road. I stopped about 100 feet back. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, a prickling sensation of pure wrongness. A Marine by trade, I reached under the seat, pulling out a 9mm pistol and swiftly chambering around. It all looked too perfect, too staged. This wasn't a wreck, it felt like an ambush. I scanned the scene, my mind racing, and spotted a thin line, a way through. I could swerve past the man's left, whip around the woman and the back of the Fiero, and punch out the other side. I slammed the shifter into first gear, floored the gas pedal, and drove my line. I shot past the back of the Fiero, missing both the car and the bodies by inches. I didn't stop until I'd put a couple of 100 feet between me and the scene, finally slowing down just enough to breathe and let my heart rate drop from a sprint. That's when I glanced into the rearview mirror. The two bodies were scrambling up to their knees. And then, as if on cue, 20 or more people erupted from the high grass on either side of the road, converging on the Fiero. In that instant, my right foot smashed the accelerator to the floor. I held it there, pedal to the metal, until I had to slow down for the I-40 East on-ramp. I will never know what would have happened had I stopped the car closer or gotten out to check on the injured. But I do know one thing, my gut saved my life on that lonely desert road. Number 6, The Men Under the Bed. This chilling story was told to me by a friend, Minji, who was in her early 20s and working as an English tutor in South Korea. A few years ago, Minji was tutoring a high school boy late one evening. They had been studying so long that the last buses had stopped running. Since his home was far away, the student begged Minji to let him crash on her floor until the first morning bus. Minji was deeply reluctant. A teenage male student spending the night was not a good look, but the boy was persistent, and she eventually agreed. They returned to her small one-room apartment. Minji took her bed while the boy laid a blanket out on the floor. Both quickly fell asleep. A few hours later, around 2 a.m., Minji was roused from her sleep. The student was shaking her shoulder. "Minji, I'm really hungry," he insisted. "Let's go get some food." Minji stared up at him in disbelief. "Food? Now? It's 2 in the morning, go back to bed." But the student was adamant. He didn't want the instant ramen she offered him, he wanted to go to the 24-hour restaurant just down the road. After several minutes of relentless persuasion, she gave in, tired and frustrated. She pulled on a jacket, and they left the apartment. As soon as they stepped out onto the quiet street, the boy turned to her, his face pale in the darkness. "I'm not hungry," he confessed. "I woke up in the middle of the night and looked under your bed. There's a man sleeping there." They immediately called the police. Upon searching the apartment, officers discovered that a homeless man had been living inside Minji's home, sleeping undetected under her bed for nearly 2 months. The student, lying on the floor just inches away, was the only person who had ever been in a position to look directly under the frame and catch a clear view. Number 5, The Basement Cackle. I was deep in the grind of a laundry day when, with a soft pop, the only light bulb on the far side of the basement blew out. My basement is essentially split in two, the laundry room, which is separated from the rest of the space by a wall and a door. The main stairs are on the other side of that dividing wall. So, the outage plunged the entire path to freedom into an absolute inky blackness. I kept my head down, forcing myself to finish folding, all the while dreading the walk I had to take. I knew I couldn't stay down there forever. Finally, I pushed open the laundry room door and stepped into the void. I moved fast, heart pounding, determined to get to the stairs as quickly as possible. I made it about halfway across the floor when I heard it. A sound so utterly vile it froze the blood in my veins, a loud, rasping cackle. Imagine the quintessential witch's laugh, but deeper, hoarser, as if the owner had been perpetually screaming for 50 years. It was right behind me, as clear as day. There was no hesitation. I simply bolted for the stairs, flying up them in a blind panic. I didn't breathe easy until the door slammed shut behind me. I waited until my father got home, then sheepishly asked him to change the bulb. I've gone down there countless times since, and I have yet to hear that awful sound again. And, to this day, I've never told a single other person in the house about the thing I heard in the dark. Number 4. A Summer Night's Escape. I was only 4 or 5 years old when my parents separated. Whenever I stayed with my mom in her 2-bedroom apartment, I always slept in her bed, even though I had my own room. Our bedrooms were at the end of a short hallway, directly across from one another. It was the middle of summer, and since our first-floor apartment was stifling, my mom had her window open. It was just behind her bed, above the headboard. I woke up suddenly in the dead of night. Sitting up, I noticed something strange. Our cat was perched in the open doorway of my mom's room. That wasn't normal. He always slept snuggled in bed with us. As I watched, the cat turned, walked across the hall, and vanished into my dark bedroom, letting out a single sharp mew. I turned to face my mother and quickly woke her up. In the few seconds it took her to stir and ask me what was wrong, we both looked back at the doorway. There, silhouetted against the dark hall, was a man. He was standing right next to my open bedroom door, clearly in the process of stepping out of the room. My mother reacted with unbelievable speed. She snatched me up and, without hesitation, literally threw me out the open screen window. She scrambled out immediately after me. We hit the ground screaming for help, and someone nearby quickly called 911. The police arrived, but found no sign of forced entry. The front door was simply unlocked, which led them to believe the intruder must have exited that way. However, my mom was adamant. She had secured both the deadbolt and the chain lock before going to bed. About a week later, the mystery deepened. While cleaning, my mother opened the water heater closet in the kitchen. Inside, she found a notebook filled with names and drawings, along with a pair of gloves and some gum wrappers. The police were called again, but all they could do was speculate. The man had been inside the apartment the whole time, hiding until he thought we were asleep. Number 3. The White SUV, a Childhood Scare. When I was around 8 to 11 years old, my older sister, 7 years my senior, would often babysit when our parents were out. She was a heavy smoker back then, and my parents strictly enforced that she had to smoke outside. Naturally, I'd tag along, playing and generally pestering her while she had her cigarette. One afternoon, my sister noticed a strange sight, a white SUV idling at the very end of our long driveway. It had a bike rack on top and the most intensely tinted windows she'd ever seen. You couldn't see anything inside. It would just sit there until she went inside, then drive to the church parking lot down the road and wait. As soon as she came out for her next smoke break, it would repeat its journey back to the end of our driveway. My sister is a brave person and initially tried to just ignore the odd behavior. That changed the next day when our parents were out again, and the SUV reappeared. It sat at the end of the driveway, just watching. I knew it was watching my sister because when I stayed inside, I'd peek through the front window, and it would remain fixed on her until she was back inside. She told our father, who was a sheriff's deputy at the time. He immediately called the police and filed a complaint. Officers showed up and looked around, but the suspicious white SUV was nowhere to be found. Months passed without a sighting, about 9 months since the start and 4 since the last time we saw it. Then, one day, it was back, and its presence became a regular unsettling occurrence again. One evening, my sister was outside with her cigarette, and the SUV showed up as usual. This time, she'd had enough. She told me to stay in the carport and started walking down the driveway to confront the driver. Halfway there, she later told us, a surge of pure paralyzing fear washed over her. She felt, as she described it, a gut-level feeling that if she took another step, she was dead. Terrified, she instantly turned around and ran back inside. Later that same week, our family car was in the shop, so we were all stuck home for the night, including my parents. My sister went outside for a smoke, and I joined her. Sure enough, the white SUV arrived. "Run inside and get Dad," she whispered urgently. I sprinted inside and told my father what was happening. He promptly grabbed his gun and started walking briskly down the driveway in the direction of the SUV, holding the weapon in hand but not pointing it. The moment the driver saw my father, the SUV floored it. It sped down the road and peeled out onto the nearby main highway. Being a cop, my dad noted the make, model, year, and any distinguishing features. The most chilling detail he reported: the license plate was completely covered in duct tape. We never saw the white SUV again. Number 2, the librarian's walk home. This incident occurred about 15 years ago, back when I was still dating my wife. Her grandmother, whose husband had passed away a year prior, was keeping herself busy by volunteering at the local library. It was a good routine for her, exercise and socialization during a tough time. The setting was South Texas in the middle of winter. The library closed at 5 p.m., and after tidying up, her walk home was always in the deepening gloom. On this particular evening, she even turned down a ride from a fellow volunteer, insisting she needed the exercise. Her house was only about a mile away, through a slightly wooded residential area. About halfway home, as the sky turned to an inky blue, she noticed a man behind her. He was walking in the same direction and gaining ground. Being elderly, she wasn't particularly fast, but it wasn't the pace that bothered her, it was the man's presence, which felt vaguely sinister. Soon, he was right behind her, then he fell into pace, trailing her footsteps. She knew then that something was definitely wrong. Fear surged, but she was almost home. She could see the top of her driveway now. She always left the lights on to give the illusion someone was waiting inside. She just needed to make it another 150 yards. For what felt like an eternity, she said he was so close she could feel his breath on the back of her neck. Around the 50-yard mark, it happened. A strong hand clamped down on her shoulder. "Okay, don't turn around. Hand over your purse, or I'll cut you." She paused for a split second, then took one big, deliberate step forward, pivoting her body as she drew the .38 revolver she kept in her purse. Without hesitation, she fired, hitting the man in the neck. The attacker survived, spending the next 5 years in a prison hospital before he died of complications. My wife's grandmother passed away last year, but until the very end, she would always lament that she felt she had pulled the trigger too soon. Number 1, a tragic move and a sudden loss. I moved to live with my dad when I was 10 years old, a new kid in an unfamiliar area. The only people I knew were a family my dad was friends with, a single mother and her 3 children. Fortunately, one of the kids was a girl about 2 years older than me, who was 12 when we first met. Over the next couple of years, we became loosely acquainted, though we weren't close friends. We eventually found ourselves sharing the same circle of friends. One evening, my friend Rob was hanging out at her house with her younger brother. The 2 siblings were alone because their mother was at work. Their mother had recently befriended a colleague whose sister, Delaney, had just been released from a mental institution. Delaney had apparently managed to figure out the family's address and the mother's work schedule by talking to her sister. While Rob was there, they heard a knock at the door. My friend's younger brother assumed it was their mother, who had a distinct knock, and opened the door without checking. Rob, who wasn't supposed to be there, immediately fled out the window and ran home down the road, not giving the knock a second thought. It wasn't their mother. It was Delaney. What happened next is a blur, and frankly, I'm glad I don't know the full details. Thankfully, my friend's younger brother managed to escape to a neighbor's house and call the police. The girl was brutally murdered just a week before Christmas. The killer, Delaney, decapitated her and left her naked in the bathtub. They had to search through the Christmas presents to find her head. I don't know where exactly they located it, but they eventually did. Because of my age or the severity of the crime, I was not allowed to attend her funeral.